Welcome to Take It from the Ironwoman. My name is Susanne Müller, your host and the Ironwoman. This podcast is about empowering yourself and others to make real changes in the world. You will hear from everyday, smart, sophisticated, hip people like you and me. Not everybody has to be an Ironwoman to impress the world. Together, we will learn from the sports and business leaders how you can become a more successful person as an entrepreneur or a leader. It's one step at a time, one day at a time. Take your steps now. Take your big steps now. Join me on this journey to success. Take It from the Ironwoman. We only have special guests, and today we're honored to have Dawn Ringrose with us. And actually, she's a connection from EdSnap's founder, Dr. Susan Kappendijk. Give a shout out to Dr. C for connecting us. But Dawn, your resume looks so amazing. Maybe just give us a few highlights of your wonderful career that you've had, and what can we learn from you?
Well, my career started back in university when I did a BSc and specialization in psychology, the science degree. And then I went on from there to do an MBA. I always wanted to work in management consulting. I started out with the big firms, Deloitte and a firm called Panelker Forrester and KPMG. I ventured into my own business back in about 1992. I continued to work in collaboration with the big firms, but I just really wanted to run my own business and take that test as an entrepreneur. Are you going to make it or not? That has been my career in a nutshell. And back in, I think it was about 1990, I stumbled upon this field of organizational excellence, and I've been really specializing in that area ever since.
When I look at your background, excellence just stands out. And I have a background in industrial psychology as well. So organizational effectiveness is also very dear to my heart, but also organizational behaviors. How do you motivate people? And when I read all your excellence, and before we recorded, I said, is there room for mistakes? So maybe can we start there?
Yeah, there's always room for mistakes because we learn so much from mistakes. Mm-hmm. And sometimes a really good question to ask when you're in an organization or yourself personally, or what are some of the dumbest things we do? Mm-hmm. When you learn from that and you think, well, gee, I can do better. It's from our mistakes and asking ourselves questions like that. When you talk to people in organizations about their suggestions and ideas and innovations for doing things better, this is an incredible contribution that it makes to improvement. In fact, it's about 90% of what helps organizations improve are being able to have those conversations with people about those things. And 10% of the time, you're going to learn from outside of the organization, other, let's say, high-performing organizations or people that excel in certain subject matter areas. I really place a lot of emphasis on that. The mistakes, the suggestions, ideas, and innovations.
You mentioned that you've been in the business and also as an entrepreneur since 1984, and now it's 2024. What have you seen over that span? We've seen like the computer era coming in, the .com, and it feels like everything is going faster. But tell us a little bit about the good times.
The changes I've seen. Well, first and foremost, when I started at the large consulting firms back in the early 80s, I noticed that over time, if I take a look at the landscape over time, the way women are treated in the workplace has certainly gotten better. And then, like you say, the influence of technology, using computers and things that help us do our work faster, allow us to do so much more than we could manually. The introduction of excellence models in the late 80s, early 1990s was a real game changer for me because here was all this research in one place that said, hey, this is what's common to high-performing organizations. It brought together everything I had been doing and was of great interest, of course, to me. And then the other thing I've noticed too over time, as I look at the three very important components of any society, is the government, the business sector, and the nonprofit sector. And they all have very important roles to play. They should be in a balance. because nonprofits help us address issues or causes of concern. Business is so important for bringing products and services and new innovative things our way. Government is there to deliver essential services. I see that today things are not in a very good balance. And years ago, I think they were in a much better balance. But today, there's way too much. Government has grown way, way too large, and they're doing way, way too many things. And usually when that happens, you don't end up being that efficient or effective. You need to make sure the nonprofit sector is in their lane doing what they do best. And same with the business sector is so important to any economy. Then, of course, the business sector can do a lot of things that others can't do that efficiently or effectively. You should never take away from that. And government has gotten way too large, and people are becoming way too dependent on the government and expecting them to be able to help with every little thing. I just think that all that adds up to pretty unhealthy kind of society, community, economy. And we're quite out of balance now. So those are some of the changes that I've seen over time. And lastly, on the nonprofit side of things too, very good that you have nonprofits that are dedicating themselves to a given cause, or let's say a given profession or industry sector, and the wonderful work that they do. But there's also in the last maybe decade, or could be a little bit longer, there's been a rise of certain interest groups that are very much trying to influence others. And I think that they're part of the imbalance that has occurred too, because you can be small and speak loudly, but does that mean that you should get all that attention? Is what you're doing healthy for society and the community? There's been some things going on with interest groups lobbying that are again creating or contributing to that imbalance that I see. Room for improvement.
That's why we need you. But the government, the business, and the nonprofit sector, they all have to probably work better together. Sometimes the business can go faster. When we see, let's say, I remember when social media came on board, when I was working at Nestle, they were like, do we have to tell people they're not allowed to use Facebook? But then Nestle had a Facebook page. Where does the government, the legality come in? Sometimes the business is ahead of the government, but how can we work better together? And then the nonprofit sector with the education, how can we integrate that much better?
Years ago, decades ago, everyone was staying in their lane and doing a very good job at what they did. But today, to me, a healthy balance would be 50% of the working population is in the private sector and business, 25% is in the nonprofit sector, and 25% is in the government sector. That would be healthy. But you want to take a look at any given country in the world, and you want to take a look at the balance that they have. And I would say that the most efficient, effective, high-performing governments in the world, only about 25% of their working population is indeed employed with the government. They've got that balance that's still in place.
And what countries are you thinking of?
Well, Singapore is certainly one of them that has shown the rest of us how government should work in a lot of respects. And there's others that are strong too. You'll see that in the excellence literature of high-performing governments, whether they're municipal or provincial or state or national governments. You'll see the award recipients or the stories about those governments that are quite high-performing. And you'll see them at the top of lists, If you take a look at the Social Progress Index or the OECD Index or the Good Governance Index that's coming out of the Chandler Institute in Singapore, if you take a look if certain countries do satisfaction surveys, and you could get the feedback from the citizens about how they're doing. And actually, my business has done a very unique study since 2015. We're taking a look at what is the current state of excellence in the world by size of organization, industry sector, country, and region. And so we're getting a pretty good handle on that too, which is the first time that's ever been done.
I'm from Switzerland. When you're from a smaller country, and Singapore obviously also on the smaller side, it's maybe a little easier than when you think of Canada or the US or other big countries, that it is harder because then the government it's taking over or is much bigger.
They're growing in Canada and the United States. The government is growing way too big and doing way too much. They've lost sight of what are essential services, which is really their role and their mandate, because they spread themselves so thin and into other areas, taking away from the business sector, taking away from the nonprofit sector, asking for more and more in terms of tax to support what they're doing. It just becomes a very unhealthy balance, because they really, if you try to be everything and do everything, you really end up being quite inefficient and ineffective. You see that within, let's say, an individual organization. So governments have to be really careful with that. They should stay in their lane. They should take full advantage of a business sector that is innovative and creative and can do things quite time efficiently and cost effectively. They have a really important role to play. You never, ever want to let your business sector falter, because there goes your economy. And then the nonprofit sector has always done such a good job supporting all these different causes and, professions and industry sectors. And that's so important for keeping those sectors healthy, or for raising money for certain important causes that aren't supported well by either government or the business sector. So we really need each of these sectors, key sectors, to be functioning at a high level.
And since you're the expert, if you had a magic wand, what would you do? What would be a few tips? How can we create a better world for all of us?
Well, number one, I think that in our curriculum, in the K-12 system, in universities, colleges, trade schools, we have to teach students about excellence. We have to say, here's the principles and here's the practices that are used by high-performing organizations. And here's some stories about high-performing organizations and the journey from the beginning to the point at which they are right now, very, very mature. And this is how they got there. And you learn from the way that their performance just continues to improve. We need to have that in our educational system. And if we don't, then we need to make sure that people learn about that, because it's applicable to any size or type of organization. It's applicable to any role, and it helps us all perform better, whether it's us as a professional or in the role that we play, or it is for the organization to have a good reference or a good guideline. It provides a roadmap for that organization to up its game. This is really important that people know about this. When excellence models were first introduced, and this is the global research that had taken place and defined what's common to high-performing organizations, those models were first introduced in the late 80s, early 90s. Do you know that today, the global research tells us that only 20% of the working population even knows about this? That statistic has got to change. This is what gets me out of bed every morning, is that I want to transfer knowledge to more people about this so they can use it to their advantage, because the excellence models provide a formula for success. And this is what I found when I've read about these organizations and learned about them, when I have done this kind of work with organizations. It's very formulaic. If you implement the practices that we know are common to high-performing organizations, you develop a culture committed to excellence in the organization, where people are always asking, what are we doing now? How can we do it better? And then you go on to achieve exceptional results across a balanced system of measurement. And it's very formulaic, and it doesn't happen overnight, but it happens on average for organizations that are just, starting out with something like this. Probably take about 3 years for them to put it in place. And a lot of organizations might already have a fair bit of this in place, but they've got to work on a few things. So over the course of, let's say, 3 years, which is not a long period of time, you can really make a difference. I've even been in situations where I've been working with various countries who have set their mind to do this too, to become a more high-performing government. I've watched the amazing work that can take place over the course of even a decade, that they have turned their situation right around. So it's very powerful. And because only 20% of the working population knows about this, I just think, why haven't we been better at getting this information out to people? And so that's why I run a social venture business. I put my publication on the website that says, here's the definitions of these principles and practices. Here's the implementation guidelines. Download it at no charge. I want you to know about this. I want you to use it to your advantage.
Mhm.
And I always figure that people fall into 3 groups. There's a do-it-yourself group that's very capable of doing all of this on their own. There's the I need a little bit of help group who wants to attend webinars and workshops. And then there's the group that says, oh boy, we need a lot of help. So we might need some consulting services to help us find our way. And so I try to put as much as I can on my website, because on there is not only the publication, but there's the reports that have come out of this global research study that we're doing. People can attend webinars at no charge. There's blogs they can download and this sort of thing. So there's a lot of information on there.
What is the name of your website?
It's organizationalexcellencespecialists.ca. That is just chock full of information, and it's intentional. And the other thing that I do that's intentional, there's very few things that people have to pay for. But when they do, they pay for, let's say, to attend our workshops or something like that. I make sure that things are priced really low, because we're dealing with people all over the world. And I don't want there to be any barriers to them participating with this sort of thing. So there's a lot they can do on their own. There's a lot they can do by attending webinars that are no charge and learning more. And then there's some services that we provide at a cost, but we've intentionally tried to keep that pretty low, or so it's appropriate for a particular country. Because here you take a look at the income by country, of course, it varies tremendously.
Yeah.
And so you really have to keep that in mind if you want to populate the world with more people that know about this and can use it to their advantage. You've got to keep that in mind when you price things, and when we license professionals to use what I've developed and that sort of thing. I make sure that those prices will work anywhere in the world.
Well, I have to say thank you so much for all the great work you do. And hopefully more people are listening to the podcast and also going to your website so we can learn about those excellence models. As a coach, we also use like frameworks and models. So I will go certainly onto the website and see. We all know that discipline, I come from the sports world. I'm a marathon runner. So you plan and you follow the plan, but that can be transferred into the business. So if you follow a plan and you do it right the first time, then excellence can be achieved. But I also think it's the business and the government and the nonprofits, they also have to evolve. We're changing and the change is faster. But if you have a solid background, don't start the house with the balcony. We start at the bottom of the house. If you have solid foundation with education, and as you mentioned, having that in the school system, I would have wanted to take a class like this rather than geometry. That would have been so much more that I could take into my business today.
Students can learn at any age about these things. They grow up learning more and more about it, and then they're better equipped for the workforce when they leave school, and they can add way more value for their employer, because they come ready with that, importantly, that growth mindset. What are we doing now, and how can we do it better?
I'm learning so much from you. Thank you for sharing your experiences. What are you taking away from this episode? So much to learn, so much to read. Take it from the Ironwoman. We have episodes every Monday. Come and join us, learn from others, and grow with others. And also, Take It from the Ironwoman is the book Global Business Coaching with Sports Parallels. Download it or get it in your local bookstore. Support local businesses and small businesses. Thank you for your support, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.